Welcome to the K in Clarity podcast. I'm the host, Mezue. During this episode, we're joined by Ricardo Silva, currently the Regional Director at Premier Medical Corporation, an adjunct faculty at both Villanova University and Valencia College. Ricardo Silva has been instrumental in advancing global AI ethics, data-driven healthcare, responsible AI governance, and digital health transformation across diverse healthcare systems and geographies. An internationally recognized expert, Silva has played a pivotal role in translating emerging health technologies and responsible AI governance into scalable, patient-centered solutions for both global organizations like the World Health Organization and health systems in Latin America, the US, and beyond. Silva's expertise spans building and implementing frameworks for AI in healthcare, directing significant health innovation programs, and developing landmark telemedicine and electronic medical record platforms. He has also served as the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the Washington Global Health Innovation Exchange, Chief Innovation Officer in the private sector, and Chair of the Healthcare Technology Certification Commission for the American College of Clinical Engineering. In his academic, advisory, and leadership roles, Silva has shaped the next generation of health tech leaders through his executive education, strategic alliances, and curriculum development. His dedication to integrating technology and human needs continue to drive meaningful, evidence-based transformation and person-centered innovation throughout the global digital health ecosystem. In this conversation, we discuss the intersection of artificial intelligence and healthcare, emphasizing the importance of ethical considerations, data governance, and the role of AI in enhancing human decision-making. He highlights the need for organizations to establish a solid foundation for AI implementation, focusing on data management and security. The discussion also covers the challenges of interoperability between consumer and medical-grade devices and the importance of education in navigating the landscape of AI. Lastly, Silva concludes with a call for ethical oversight in AI development to ensure a positive impact on humanity. If this is your first time tuning in, here's the gist. The healthcare industry is buzzing with innovations, but there's a lot of noise and misconceptions out there. That's where we come in. Because of my experience in the healthcare ecosystem, I've gained a unique vantage point into the industry's inner workings. We're bringing you the conversations that typically happen behind boardrooms and strategy sessions, the real challenges, innovative solutions, and game-changing insights that are reshaping healthcare as we know it. On this podcast, we're bringing you face-to-face with the industry-leading healthcare founders, executives, and innovators. We're talking about the nitty-gritty of building and scaling healthcare companies, the hurdles they've overcome, and the strategies that have led to their success. More importantly, we dive into the personal challenges that come with trying to change a system as complex as U.S. healthcare. So whether you're a healthcare entrepreneur, a medical professional, or just someone passionate about the future of healthcare, this podcast is your backstage pass to the minds shaping the industry. Now let's have Ricardo tell us a little bit about themselves. Welcome, Ricardo, to the K in Clarity podcast. For the people listening, can you give a brief overview of who you are and what it is you do?
Thank you, Mezue. It's a pleasure being here. I'm Ricardo Silva. I'm a biomedical clinical engineer who has spent most of his life working in different AI-related projects. Today, I work as both a consultant and faculty teaching AI and doing research in the area.
We typically like to do an icebreaker before starting our main questions. And so my icebreaker for you is if you could revise or add anything to an AI code to make it more ethical from everything that you've done in your background, what would that exactly be and why?
Wonderful. So I actually work heavily on that area of ethical AI. And what I would love to do is add a Jiminy Cricket to all of those Pinocchios that are being built out there. Most people are concentrated on the technical aspects of AI. How do I solve a problem? But every technical solution should be filtered through an ethical engine to validate the fact that not only if you can do it, you should do it, but you should validate if the outcome is actually beneficial for the user, for the society, for the people. So that Jiminy Cricket is essential for every AI that is being built out there.
Tying this to your background, I know you've built a career over guiding organizations and how they should be able to implement AI, particularly within healthcare. And so with your background and your experience, how have you really thought about implementing AI within organizations and helping them kind of embed it to make sure that it's having the right type of ethical considerations within the market of healthcare?
Okay, so first off, AI is just an expansion of digital transformation. So, in order for an organization to properly use AI, they first need to properly use digital technology. So, you need to have a great foundation on how do you do all of your data management, all of your data accountability, cybersecurity. So, you need to have that. If you actually implement AI on a platform that is not ready, then you have a whole lot of trouble. You have all of these technologies just generating data that is not usable, not accounted for, not complementary to the object of the business. So first off, let's learn what the business does, and then we put the AI on top to enhance what you're already doing. Doing it the other way around is a big mistake.
I know structuring and validating data is absolutely critical to AI within healthcare. And so what is your process and maybe best practices that you think other healthcare organizations can implement from there to actually structure their data in the right type of way?
So the majority of healthcare organizations have an electronic medical record. The electronic medical record system is your repository, is your source of truth upon which you develop all of your different techniques. So in that case, you use that data to support your clinical decisions. And one particular area of AI are clinical decision support systems. So if you have a good data structure and you have good data governance and you have proper clinical practice guidelines, then you can put all of that together to build a clinical decision support system. And there's been some great implementations, both in individual hospitals and in public health, that take advantage of all of this existing. And again, it's pre-existing. You cannot invent the data. You need to base your decisions on what you already have. So provided you have the governance, the data, the clinical decision support guidelines, and the know-how, then you would have a successful implementation.
I also want to touch upon the aspect of security. Could you speak on how, security is important in this validation aspect and establishing the right type of criteria within AI?
Correct. So again, we go back to data governance. If we are thinking about the United States of America, we have HIPAA. If we are thinking about the European Union, we have GDPR. Both regulations establish very specific rules and guidelines on how data should be managed from the privacy standpoint. So you need to ensure that the data is kept private and secure. You need encryption, pre, post, in transit, at rest. So there are a lot of very specific rules and regulations about the privacy and security. Then you have on top of that a lot of change management that needs to be in place. And that establishes regulation for who should be able to see or not to see the data that is in the record. Each of these layers of complexity opens a potential backdoor and adds uncertainty on how this is properly being managed and traced. So each of these backdoors needs to be properly secure. And in my own experience, which is where I come from, medical devices are connected to this network. They start generating data. And most of these advanced medical devices, they already have a built-in backdoor for remote monitorization and management of the device. And many times, the people are not aware of the cyber threats that this door could create into the system. So we need to make everybody aware. And the weakest link is always where the chain will break. And the weakest link is always human beings. So the human beings that work on all of this system need to be properly educated and understand what they can and what they cannot do in order to ensure that the system is as safe as possible. Does that mean that it would be super secure and that no hacker could ever breach in? Nope. What you want is always to make it safer than the guy next door. You want it for your system to be harder to breach than the one next door in order to ensure that your system would be safe than that of your neighbor. And it always needs to be kept better because there's always new tools, new trades, new games, new doors, and you always need to learn how to secure the new ones that are being made.
Yeah. Always being a step ahead is crucial, right?
Oh, yeah.
I think tying what you're saying there, a lot of data I know is being generated outside of the traditional clinical environment. And so how do you actually go about making sure the data is structured well, but also that it's actually adding value within the process of healthcare?
There are so many layers onto that question. So first off, and we need to make this very clear, a wearable device, a consumer device, even if it's cleared by FDA, is not a hospital device. So a home device, an Internet of Medical Things device, even if it's cleared by the regulatory agency, it's not a hospital device. What does this means? That the rules, regulations, interoperability, standards, calibration, etc., are not the same. So you cannot treat a wearable ECG as you would treat a high-resolution ECG on your cardiology laboratory. They are ECGs. They are both monitoring the electrical activity of the heart, but they are designed and built to operate in completely different environments, under completely different circumstances. So first off, if you're gathering the data from this external device, even medical-grade device, before introducing this data into your electronic medical record, you need to do the proper augmentation. You need to add the proper metadata and information in order to make it comparable, which is not necessarily compatible. And that is important. Again, let's think about AI. If you're using an AI algorithm, let's say an arrhythmia detection algorithm, and you're running this arrhythmia detection algorithm on your high-resolution ECG, and you want to run the exact same algorithm on your wearable ECG, you're making a fundamental mistake because those two signals are clearly not the same. And that is for medical-grade Internet of Things devices. What about the consumer grade? What about your Fitbit? Could you incorporate Fitbit data into your electronic medical record? Sure, you could. In fact, you should. But again, should you consider the Fitbit data as if it was high-resolution data acquired in the hospital under controlled circumstances? Hell no. And that is a clear distinction that we need to make and understand. However, the high-resolution ECG, maybe in a control patient, you run a high-resolution ECG once a year, whereas your Fitbit is being worn all the time. So that is a clear and very important distinction. And the Fitbit doesn't only register your heart rate, it also registers your activity. So now we're talking about a multi-dimensional data that when combined can add value that the high-resolution device at the hospital cannot. So to make the long story short, you actually need to treat the two as clearly different entities and manage the data in a different way and run AI algorithms in different fashion because they're clearly distinct entities. And that is important. I don't know if that answered your question or you want me to delve a little deeper into any of those aspects.
No, I think it's a good start. And I want to maybe touch on a little bit about how organizations can actually work on the due diligence and the accuracy verification of that data being compatible on a consumer grade and also a medical grade environment.
So again, interoperability is the first relevant word. If we have a healthcare organization, let's talk about a remote patient monitoring organization where you are actually getting paid by CMS for keeping track of your patients. And each patient is wearing a different brand of smartwatch. Let's keep it simple. Then you have a clear problem because there is no interoperability standard for smartwatch data. In fact, each of the different providers would use a different API with access to different bits and pieces of the information. So across platforms, the data is different. So if you have that situation where you have patients, in fact, users, each of whom is using a different smart watch, then you would need to build a translation engine that would take the data from the different entities and somehow standardize it to your own internal format that then you can use to compare across platforms. The best case scenario today is that if you are a provider, then you have to marry a particular technology. And then you would say, well, all of my users would need to use this Fitbit. In fact, it would be even better if I provide them with the Fitbit. That way I know that everybody is using apples and that I can compare the apples with each other. I can run the same algorithms and I can do all of the same validation, authentication, etc. Ideally, we need to go towards the establishment of interoperability standards for wearable devices. There's a lot being said about devices on fire. Well, that could be a good alternative. But the fact is that someone needs to establish that those are the rules of the game so that then everybody can start playing according to those rules. So without this in place, it's very hard to close the loop and get the proper information into the electronic health record.
Touch upon as well your background with AI. I know we spoke that you like to act as a centrist in the conversation and really seek out risk partners, not risk competitors. And so how does that really color your recommendations to different organizations who are going about and deploying AI?
Great. I'm currently teaching a course to executives of a hospital, and they are learning not only the basics of what is artificial intelligence, they're also learning how themselves to create some simple agents using established technologies and large language models. But what I've made clear to them is that that is not their expertise. So it's good that they have the understanding. It's good that they know how the technology works and what it could provide. But actually, there are great companies out there who have specialized on very specific niche within the healthcare domain. So rather than attempting to do everything yourself, what you need is a good data governance or AI governance which is something that we need to start building. So organizations need to start building AI governance platforms that can assess the technology and incorporate it into their pipelines. That is fundamental, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel all the time. In fact, there are companies that are doing something called orchestration, which is kind of what we were talking before. So they actually gather data from different providers in different formats, and they harmonize the data so that it can be consumed by the electronic health record and the established platform. So that is part of what you need to do. Go to those who have domain subject expertise in the different areas and do as you've always done, a procurement process. So just like you need to decide which is the best CT scanner that I need to purchase for my organization, well, what is the best AI analytics software for my human resource department? It has to go through the same procurement pipeline as everything else, but with a proper AI governance in place.
Speaking about that, tying AI governance and how we spoke about interoperability as well. I know that accreditation and interoperability are issues in actually the adoption of AI in today in healthcare. And so maybe what lessons have you really learned in building, the standards that can actually have a seamless flow of data in healthcare that can actually help empower leaders, empower different people within healthcare to make the right decisions and choices and provide those right type of outcomes?
Okay, so the best example of interoperability that have lasted for over 20 years is DICOM, is a digital image communication standard. So all medical imaging companies had agreed on that particular standard for their images. So it doesn't matter if you have an X-ray, a CT scanner, an MRI. Doesn't matter if the brand is General Electric, Siemens, Philips, Toshiba, or whatnot. They all will generate a file with a metadata that is compatible across. That has created a great value add and a great push. If you go to FDA and you look at all of the software as medical device accreditations that have been made, the leading software as medical device accreditation categories are imaging processing or imaging analysis tools. Why? Because the images are standardized. So people can build upon that standard to develop tech that will work across platforms. And this is important because it's an economy thing. If you can only build a technology that will only serve one vendor, then you're in trouble. Because if this vendor disappears for any reason, then you're out of business. Interoperability gives you an ample playing field where you can then take any player and add value to this player. What happened in medical images needs to be expanded to the rest of the healthcare universe. We talked about wearable devices. I would love to see a DICOMization of wearable devices. I would love to see a standard across all wearable device manufacturers such that the data could then be consumed and processed uniformly by any technology developer on top. We're not there yet. Again, Devices on Fire is kind of heading in that direction. It's not just standardized, but we need something as DICOM. In fact, I know people that are working on using DICOM for things that are normally not DICOM. So they are taking, for example, electrocardiographic signals, and then they are converting the signal into a DICOMized image with the proper metadata. And they're sharing ECGs as if they were DICOM images because of the lack of a proper standard for ECGs.
How do you think, different healthcare organizations, people in different health systems, maybe health plans across healthcare, supply chain, pharma, med device, could really come together, I guess, in creating a different standard of healthcare, to work together and actually be interoperable? What are your thoughts there?
Okay. So that is a highly multidimensional problem that you're mentioning. Europe versus the U.S. The U.S. approach is that you want minimum government involvement, and that you should leave the government out of the equation so that the companies could agree to collaborate. And for example, there is the IHE, Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise, which is a private venture that has been developing interoperability standards. And most of the players actually have built solutions that are compatible with the IHE standards. However, there is no one to enforce those standards. So why would I use them? I'd rather silo my data to try to force the hospital to purchase my line of devices and then have a captive client. So if they purchase any other brand, then it would not be back compatible with what we already have. So that way you try to secure your exclusivity and your niche. And that is what's happening. In the case of DICOM, and that was also pushed by the European Union, the goal was, look, we cannot have all of these people speaking different languages because we're not going to move forward. So let's agree, let's follow the standards. It became an ISO standard. So it's an international standard. All of the countries adopt the standard, and this is the way you need to follow. It's a legislation. So it's the government acting as the regulator, as the enforcer. I don't think that government needs to do a lot of things and get into your private company economics. But government, one thing that needs to do is precisely establish the rules of the game. Determine what are the code standards that we're going to follow so that we can all work in building the economy, the nation, etc. So we need a little more understanding on what the role of the government is and how to enforce the right things so that drives the economy forward. And again, the Europeans understand sometimes they are a little too restrictive, like with the AI regulation, but they understand that companies are not going to agree to play by the same rules because that is, in theory, not in their own advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So someone needs to referee. That's what the government needs to do.
Gotcha. I know as we spoke about Europe, Europe can be considered regulatory robust, but sometimes they can also be highly punitive, right? Sometimes even at the expense of innovation. And so maybe what are some common pitfalls that you see, and what are some things that, policymakers can do to actually elicit a better change within healthcare?
Good question. So the current AI regulation is very restrictive. And I understand the gist of why they are following that path because, science fiction authors forever and ever have showcased what happens when an artificial intelligence goes wrong. And how can this thing actually do a lot of harm if it's not properly restrained. So we've seen that. The literature has shown that. The movies have shown that. And the public opinion has believed that. So the European Union, by serving its public, wants to restrict AI from going wrong. That is, in principle, good. The issue is How do you actually know? And especially with generative AI that can learn as they are being implemented. How do you restrict in a pre-market approval regulation what is going to happen with the future development of this AI when it is liberated? So they want to restrict. They fear that if they open the Pandora's box, then all hell may go loose. But the counter side of that is that if you restrict too much, then where is the room to explore? Where is the room to make mistakes, and where is the room to learn? Shouldn't we have more of a data governance system? Again, creating AI supervisory structures that could look at the behavior of the system as it's being deployed, and or, which is my proposal, ensure that every AI is connected to a Jiminy Cricket, to an ethical engine that would cross-validate whatever decision this AI is making with respect to the governing laws, regulations, codes of conduct that it's being trained with. So if we have an ethical engine on top of the system, then the ethical engine could provide a measure, a metric of decision making that is also auditable and traceable. And if we have a decision and the ethical engine says, wait, red flag, this decision might not be the most ethical one, then that can be flagged to this ethical committee, AI ethical committee or whatever, that then could look into the matter and decide whether we should move forward or not, or restrain or whatever this AI. So if we create a digital ethical engine, and we also create a physical legislation, ethical guidance committee, just as we have an ethical review board for research, well, an ethical review board for AI, we allow the development of the technology, but we have an oversight that makes sure that this technology doesn't go bad. That would be my approach. And that goes with that centric perspective that I try to present.
Yeah, I love that. I think another thing to speak about as well is that sentiment analysis and emotionally charged algorithms are kind of the topic of discussion, particularly in the EU, but might also come to the US. And this actually speaks in terms of, overclassification and social segregation. And so how do you, with your centrist perspective, actually go about navigating the gray areas of what statistical analysis actually meets the experience of a regular human, right? How does that kind of go together?
Great. And I can answer that from different perspectives. So let's start from a very technical perspective. A graduate student of mine just submitted a paper where he precisely evaluates sentiment analysis. Okay? And what he found in his paper, he analyzed IMDb reviews, is that the sentiment analysis is actually inherently biased, and it's inherently biased towards positive reviews. So it actually generates significantly more false positives than it does false negatives. So it tends to overemphasize good sentiment over bad sentiment. So the tools to produce the analytics are inherently biased. That is not a good starting. And then what are you going to use that sentiment analysis for? Could you use that sentiment analysis with people who have mental health conditions and use this to analyze their communication and see if there is a pattern that suggests that this person is entering a depressive phase, for example, in a bipolar disorder? and even go to the point whether this depression could actually lead to suicide. And use then this sentiment analysis to raise the flags so that the psychiatrist in charge of this patient can intervene and solve the issue. This seems like a very ethical, logical implementation of a sentiment analysis. And it would need to be protected by all of these same guidelines and regulations, HIPAA, GDPR, etc., that we were talking about before. And then who is the person responsible for providing the proper consents? And am I certain that the patient is in the proper mind state to allow for the system to track their sentiment and use this sentiment analysis for their own personal gain, etc.? So this is an ethical use of sentiment analysis, and it still has a lot of issues and a lot of controversy. Now, the situation that the EU wants to avoid is using this sentiment analysis or even linguistic analysis to segregate people, to classify people into different categories. And by classifying and segregating people into different categories, then that could lead to discrimination. And the issue is, should we discriminate people based on the type of language or the tone of language that they use? The fact that someone is always using big, blatant words because that's the way they learned how to speak, does that automatically flag this person as a criminal? Should we increase police surveillance just because of what language a person chooses to use? What happens to habeas corpus? What happens to habeas data? So that is the issue. Could we discriminate based on language, which is the only thing we're analyzing at that point? Is the choice of words that I'm using automatically fingerprinting me as a person that belongs to a specific category and then needs to be tracked or not? Those are the types of issues that EU wants to avoid.
I know your experience blends a lot of philosophy, engineering, and ethics. And so in your view, what can healthcare organizations really do to ensure when they're implementing AI, right, and deploying it into their different environments to make sure that it's actually retaining human dignity and reducing the unfair biases, as you've just previously mentioned?
Absolutely. So the first thing is understanding all of the things that you previously said. I need to understand what an AI is and what it is not. So AI is nothing more than a sophisticated probability engine that provides the most likely answer to the question that you ask based on the data and training it has. That supports this reasoning. So if the data and training that supports the reasoning is biased, then the reasoning, no matter what, is going to be biased. If the question that you're asking is biased or is not properly formulated, then the most probable response is not necessarily going to be the most accurate one. I mean, garbage in, garbage out. What we're doing with AI is just maximizing this algorithmic data probabilistic processing. But if we introduce garbage into the algorithm, we cannot expect anything else to pour out of the other side. So that's part of what we first need to understand. What are the limitations of the technology? It doesn't know the world. AI only knows what we have told it about the world. And that interpretation of the world is inherently biased. I mean, if we are feeding up, again, a clinical decision support system based on data that has been acquired in the United States of America, with all of the rules, regulations, and all of the peculiarities of the U.S. healthcare system that guide a lot of the decisions that are being made. And then we want to implement, we choose to implement this clinical decision support system in Brazil, in Taiwan. Why would we expect it to work? Why would we assume that the healthcare system, the genetics, the epigenetics, the culture, the behavior of the people from Brazil or Taiwan are going to match the genetics, epigenetics, behavior, eating habits of the people from the United States, whom with the AI was trained. So these are things that people do not normally realize. No one is educating you on how these systems were built, what comes into the process of developing these systems, and what are the inherent limitations that the systems has. So we need to educate the user on the proper use and understanding of the technology. That way we could create actually power users who would use the technology to the best of its capacity and understand their limitation. And when in doubt, again, this technology is here to support, not to replace. And that is fundamental from the human dignity standpoint. If the system says that I should do this, but my culture, my ethics, my belief system tells me that that is wrong, then I, the human being, needs to move forward and state that is what I want to do. Your AI is telling me that I should pay for this very expensive treatment or I will die. Well, I choose not to do it. Why? Because I am an independent, thinking human entity. That needs to be a fundamental part of everything that we do with AI. Who is in control? The human is in control. And we should never forget.
That's a powerful statement. I think that can reverberate, into the world that we live in today. Things are changing so fast. And I think others, children that are going to grow, they might be able to, think of this technology, but are they able to be independent, right? That's something that is also going to play as well in healthcare. And I think tying that thought is, how do you think the current environment, the current landscape, what are the biggest misconceptions that people have about AI in healthcare, about its adoption in healthcare? And where do you think the discussion is maybe the most emotionally charged at the moment or within, the next few years?
Wow, again, Mezue, those questions of yours are always so emotionally charged. So let's break that up. First off, AI is not going to replace you. That is the first concern. Is AI going to replace some jobs that are currently being performed by humans? Absolutely. Yes. But AI is also going to open many more jobs that are not currently in existence, like everything that we've talked about, AI governance and AI ethical committees and AI support systems and AI algorithm developers or whatnot. I mean, it's probably 2 jobs are going to be created by any one job that is going to be replaced by AI. So the opportunity is huge, but we need to become educated. We need to become trained or retrained on how to use this technology, because this technology is synergistic. This is a technology that enhances human capacity, provided you properly know how to use it. So AI per se is not going to replace you, Mezue, but someone who uses AI, it's definitely going to replace you, because they would have more competitive advantage. So the issue that we have now, And it's an issue that goes to the basic of the education system. Are we actually training human beings to become empowered in the age of AI? Are we teaching the metacognitive skills that human beings need to learn in order to better use the technology? Or are we still thinking that memorization is the most important skill? Why the heck do I need to memorize a book when any book written in the world is accessible on the palm of my hand? That makes no sense. But how do I learn to recognize what is a valid argument and distinguish it from what is not? How can I learn to recognize what is evidence-based research versus a simple opinion, which is not supported on evidence? It's important. And do people in social media do? What do the influencers do? They influence your behavior, but most of the time it's based on opinion, not on facts. And those metacognitive abilities are human in nature and need to be enforced, need to be provided, because if not, you're not going to learn them. And that is key, because if you do not have those metacognitive abilities and you relinquish your metacognition into the AI and you make the AI decide for you, then you're losing your humanity.
Tying that together, I guess, how do you think accreditation will actually play a part in maybe the clinical workflow of different people within healthcare and actually having AI support, the decision making and the way that they choose to look at data?
Perfect. So we need to rethink the way we do accreditation. So up to today, you have a medicine or you have a device, and you do all of these preclinical, clinical trials to make sure that the device or the medicines are safe and effective. Safe and effective doesn't mean that they are 100% safe or 100% effective. That all comes with a degree of freedom. What you want is that they are safer and more effective than the alternative. So in the case of AI-enhanced technologies, you need to make sure that these AI-enhanced technologies are, again, safer and more effective than the alternative. And then you come, okay, so what happens with human reasoning and human decision-making as support? So if humans have a failure rate of whatever, 20%, and we create an AI that has a failure rate of 5%, can we still ensure that there are no failures? No, there's still a 5% failure. It is inherent, it is intrinsic. Tech is not perfect, no matter what. However, if I am a 20% failure rate company supported by a 5% failure rate, then if we combine the knowledge of the AI with my knowledge, the failure rate of us synergistically working together should be below that 5% threshold. And that is where we need to head. So we do not need perfect. We need better than what we have. But this is a continuous process. So we need the oversight. So rather than certifying pre-facto before it goes to market, yes, we still need to do a pre-facto certification. But now we need something that doesn't exist. Exists in a way. This is a post-market surveillance. But now the post-market surveillance needs to become much more active, because now you are supervising a synergistic relation between human and machine. Just like healthcare providers need to be certified and recertified every so often, now this AI enhancement tool would also need to be certified and recertified every so often. So you need to create a whole new process of accreditation that is not in place right now, that is more akin to people accreditation than it is to device or medicine accreditation.
I know something interesting we had discussed is reflecting on papal history with an institution that has lasted 2,000 years and, the philosophical debates. How do you think maybe leaders in healthcare can actually think about the impacts of social upheaval with the rapid advancement of AI that's going to happen in healthcare?
Well, social upheaval and AI is not just limited to healthcare. Social upheaval and AI are across, because this is an ubiquitous technology. In healthcare, let's take the client, the customer, out of the equation for a second. In healthcare, we do not currently have enough human resources to meet the needs of the global population. We have a lack of resources. And I'm not talking about the third world, I'm talking about rural America. There are not enough nurses, medical providers, specialists in rural America to serve the needs of the people. So we need to enhance the people that we have so that they can do more with the same resources. So from the provider perspective, technology AI is not here to replace me. It's here to complement me. It's here to enhance me. And it's actually here to provide me more business opportunities from the business perspective. So AI in healthcare, from the healthcare provider perspective, is not a risk, it's rather an opportunity. Now let's go to the other side of the equation. Now let's go to the patient. Would a patient, would a human being feel comfortable discussing their mental health issues with a chatbot? Would it be better for the patient to discuss their personal issues with a chatbot? Or would it be better for the patient to discuss their personal issues with another person? If you ask some people, the answer is that provided the proper guardrails, they feel more comfortable talking to the chatbot than talking with the other individual. And that is surprising, and that is interesting. But again, are we providing the proper ethical guardrails? The psychologist and the psychiatrist and your lawyer, they have client confidentiality, and they cannot disclose your personal information to a third party. Are we building that patient-client confidentiality into this AI support algorithms? So this is, again, this is where the government needs to legislate. Not a lot of places, but there's some very specific places where legislation needs to be in place. Are we ensuring patient-provider confidentiality through AI chat bots being created for this specific space?
My last question for you before we go on to the lightning round is, you said previously in our conversation right now, is people will not be replaced with AI, but people with AI will have the edge. I think, what skills and mindsets should healthcare leaders and clinicians really have to symbiotically work with AI to provide the right type of outcomes?
Great. Well, again, it comes back to education. So we need to educate the user on how to properly understand and use the technology. That's the first thing. You cannot use what you do not understand. Or if so, you would not use it properly. And therefore, you're at risk of not taking full advantage of the technology. So we need to educate the people. And within this education, when you know something and you understand something, then you're less afraid of it. That is part of human evolution. Change is always risky, and everybody is afraid of change. However, if you understand what this means, then you reduce that inherent scare of the technology. So that's the first thing. We need to educate people to reduce the barrier so that they can then approach the technology with a different mindset, with an open mind, and see how they can then utilize the technology. So there are jobs that are going to be replaced by AI? Absolutely. If you're currently working on a customer support phone line, then most likely you're going to be replaced because a chatbot can do your job much more efficiently. However, the chatbot might not have all the answers. So perhaps you can become an AI customer support supervisor who uses their metacognitive abilities to empower and enhance the responses given by hundreds or thousands of agents. So you need to re-educate yourself to your new role, to your new position, to your new possibilities. I'm not answering the phone. The AI is answering the phone. But if the AI cannot answer the question, then I will be summoned, and the type of questions that I need to answer are going to be much more complex. So it's a different role in a different playing field where I need to build new competencies. And that's it. We have to do it no matter what.
Absolutely. Now it's time for the lightning round. And so my first question to you is, what steps should any organization be able to have and take as the most common steps to deploying AI in any healthcare setting?
In any institution, you need both a top-down and a bottom-up approach. Bottom-up, purchase for your organization whatever large language model. I don't care if it's ChatGPT or Google Gemini or whatever. Buy that and make it available to all of your employees. Allow them to play with the tool. They would figure out ways to use the technology that you have not even thought about. But create a process where you can monitor and supervise what they're doing, where you could actually gather input from what they have discovered. So you need that bottom-up approach. The top-down approach is the guardrails and limitations. So if you are giving them access to a tool, or if you are incorporating additional tools into your organization, well, have an AI governance system. Create ethical AI governance panel with different members from your organization to supervise the implementation of the technology. I mean, get the top C-suite involved in the governance and management of the tools, in selecting those high complexity tools, and in operating the guidelines and regulations for those tools to be properly deployed within your organization. You do that, way to go.
My next question for you is going to maybe contradict some of the things that you already said. Currently, is I know within AI, generative AI is all the rage. But from my knowledge and from what I've heard is that sometimes when it comes down to AI, right, a lot of healthcare leaders are skeptical about generative AI and it being used in their workflows. What do you think maybe the future of AI is going to look like beyond large language models and generative AI?
Okay, wonderful. So yes, the current limitation with generative AI is that they hallucinate. Absolutely. And what is a hallucination? It's nothing more than the most probable answer to a poorly asked question. So there are two ways to solve that issue. One way is educating the user, as we've been discussing. The other thing is creating the proper guardrails. And there are some very interesting AI companies that are doing precisely that and are creating large language models for healthcare with the proper guardrails. So when you ask this question that has a poor answer, rather than the AI generating a poor answer and giving you a hallucination, the AI is going to go back to you and say, sorry, but that question is not properly asked. I don't have enough information to answer that question. Can you be more specific or something and guide the answer? But rather than providing an answer all the time, they would have the capacity to limit their responses when the probable response doesn't meet a certain standard. So that is important. That is moving towards that ethical guardrails that you need to build on your AI. So as we improve on the development of technologies and as we understand how to properly put these guardrails, then we will build more sophisticated ethical entities that would be a better match to our needs.
Perfect. My last question for you is, what is maybe one regulatory or ethical risk in AI healthcare that you think will command global attention within the next 5 years?
Okay. Autonomous systems. So today, let's talk about robotic surgery. In today's robotic surgery, what we really have is human augmented surgery. So we actually have a human that is operating a robotic assistive tool, but is the human in charge. The next generation would be AI autonomous surgery, where you have a human that does the surgical planning, but once the planning has been performed, they hit play and the AI would autonomously support the surgery. The AI by itself would operate. Again, nothing is perfect. At the moment when an AI makes a surgical mistake, and it is going to happen, then all hell will go loose. And people would start complaining that AI is bad because look how this AI killed a person. So we need to be prepared for that. And we need to create the proper legal, ethical support to reduce the problems that are going to be happening once autonomous systems start operating in a limited fashion, doesn't matter, but once autonomous systems start operating in healthcare, there is a problem.
Well, Ricardo, thank you for your time and for speaking on different aspects of, data governance, the standards and the future of AI. Maybe what are some final thoughts that you can leave with the audience?
Look, we are on a crossroad. AI is at a stage where it could go in one of two directions. It can become the best thing that has happened to humanity and drive us into a higher state of consciousness, or it could become a replacement for human beings, as so many sci-fi authors have alerted. It is the time when we, as concerned citizens, need to make a stand in getting ethical engines into our AI systems and ensuring a better future for all.
Again, thank you for your time. Where can people follow you if they choose to do so?
Well, actually, I am a sci-fi author and I'm devoting a lot of my time to my sci-fi. So if you go to cometsurfer.net, I'm posting every week things that are, yes, part of my sci-fi universe, but are also related to this topic of ethical AI and everything else that we've discussed. So cometsurfer.net and then social networks associated with that. That is a great place. LinkedIn. It's where I post the most, so you can follow me there.
Ricardo, thank you again for your time on the K in Clarity podcast.
Thank you.